Hey, Try. So good to have you in this class this summer. I think we tried last summer and didn't work out or something. So here we are this time, end of week one, and so glad you're part of the group here. And just want to send you a reply video here in week one as we get started. Gives me a chance to say hello a little more personally and get our conversation going. Hope we're going to be able to connect in person here during the quarter as well, since we're close by, even though I think your work day often takes you through most of the day. So, but hopefully eventually our paths are going to cross here because I'd love to shake your hand and get to talk in person. But also want to just give you a little bit of feedback here on what you've written in week one, which in both forums is excellent. So appreciate the thoughtful responses, engagement with the secondary material. I think kind of engaging the text itself, which is fantastic. I'm excited about the perspective you're going to bring as a Catholic to the class because historically, I would say a lot of the, ironically, maybe poor readings of Romans have been driven by Protestant concerns with the law, which Protestants associated negatively with Catholicism. And I think that has led to a lot of bad reading of Romans because the law, with its rituals, its requirements, its path for the people, is treated by Paul as good, as a blessing, as a gift, and not as some kind of barrier or, some other kind of extra thing that true Christianity is going to throw off. Instead, there's a deep appreciation of how um, ritual, certain works required by the law act to form people and community. I think that is actually what Paul assumes in Romans. And so we want to be careful when we get to these parts where he's going to talk about the limits of the law of Moses. And I think your perspective is going to be super helpful to the class discussion there. No pressure, but I think it'll be good. And I hope you'll just feel free to speak your mind and reflect on your experience in your own Christian community. Um, what you have here in the first forum about Habakkuk, I think, is great because you've uh, taken on board, I think, what Catherine Grebe is presenting as a interpretation of the passage. I think she wisely treats these kind of lines of the thesis of the letter as um, layered, evocative. We don't want to try to pin it down too tightly since it's a programmatic statement for the rest of the letter. And it's going to take, in some ways, the letter in its entirety and all of its stages for the meaning of these pregnant phrases that it's beginning to unfold. So I think that she is offering us a judicious reading, and then you're drawn, as I think we should be, to a kind of messianic understanding of these words, and I think that also fits. Jesus really is the focus of the justice of God. So when Paul writes that the justice of God is revealed from faith to faith, I think, following Grebe, that this, based on Habakkuk, should be understood as being revealed from the faith of God, the faithfulness, the trustworthiness of God, to the faith of the human, God's covenant partner. And that human faith is the fruit of God's own faithfulness to the human. And this is what Habakkuk himself is struggling to learn amidst the horror that has befallen his generation at the hands of the Chaldeans. This is something God has allowed. He is outraged. He's complaining to God. And the response of the Lord, which becomes the word of the Lord to and through the prophet, is that because God is trustworthy, the just will live by faith. In contrast to the arrogant, the proud, people who take advantage of the vulnerable, who exploit those who are in need. Instead, the just will live by faith, meaning they will trust God enough to be able to live generously in the midst of circumstances that are very difficult, with people that could be taken advantage of, but because they trust God to provide, they're able to avoid that tendency and to be able to live a life that reflects the generosity of God. So that's going to spill out into the argument of Romans. Faith is going to build on this meaning in the way Paul teaches it, because it's going to be about not usurping God's authority as judge and trying to rule over one another, but instead trusting God as judge and recognizing our need for grace from one another rather than thinking that we've been given in the law or somewhere else some set of neat criteria where we could define some as the rulers over others. As I said, though, I think this still can retain a kind of messianic horizon because the faith of God and the faith of the human reach their fullness, I would say, in the figure of the Messiah, in whom the faith of God and the faith of the human are one person, you might say, to draw on the Chalcedonian formulation. And so this then is spreading this life of faith in the Messiah to people like those in Rome who are of non-Jewish background but have been baptized into Israel's Messiah and are therefore sharing in the spirit of resurrection in the way that they're learning to treat one another, to share their table with each other, to share their time, their economic goods and possessions with each other, to bring their competing commitments and moral intuitions and even political allegiances to a shared table and learn to negotiate a shared life with each other by really learning from one another and learning to kind of lean into a welcome of one another rather than kind of hanging back judgmentally and thinking that everybody has got to subscribe to one rule for how people live together. So you got some great beginnings of this, and I love what you say about the way that priests go into the mass with this, what we would think is a symbol of shame that God has turned into a symbol of glory. And living in that tension, I think, is so key to Christian discipleship, Christian formation, what Christians are gathering at Mass or other occasions of worship to remember and to be shaped by is God's power to turn what human beings despise, what we find shameful, what seems like a defeat, into God's own power of life. So great stuff there. Here in the second response forum, I like what you're drawing from Eliot as well as Taubes. I do think that there's evidence of a kind of delicacy in Paul's writing in this letter, somewhat distinct from other letters, say, especially to the Galatians, and a lot of sort of deference that still expresses authority. I think you're trying to strike that balance in what you say. When Eliot talks about the force of Paul's rhetoric, I think one sense that he means is what you're talking about, these like intense words, where, the wrath of God being manifest against all human injustice, depravity, all these like intense ways of talking that I think good English translations capture. But I also think Eliot means something that I want to emphasize because it's going to be a theme of our course, and that is that by rhetoric, he means that Paul is writing to make a certain point. There is a cutting edge, you might say, to what Paul writes. And we might describe that as the rhetorical purpose of Paul at particular stages of the argument, the rhetorical purpose of the whole of the letter. And often the letter to the Romans has not been read with a lot of sensitivity to this rhetorical force. Instead, it's been kind of flattened into a theological treatise, something that is not occasional, something that's not oriented to particular pastoral needs, even political needs on the ground. And I think that has resulted in poor interpretation of the letter. In fact, the letter manifests a very definite rhetorical purpose at each stage. And we want to try to sort of tease out what that is. As a whole, the letter is oriented towards dealing with certain challenges in Rome with how this non-Jewish audience of the letter is relating to some of Paul's Jewish relatives who are hostile to the audience. These would probably be non-Christian Jews in Rome that are worried about what the implications of this Jewish movement are that's welcoming Gentiles in the way that the church in Rome is. It lands also pastorally in how the community is learning to recognize the gifts of one another as part of a diverse community where people are diverse members of one body, relating to corrupt and oppressive Roman authorities. How do you handle that? Then in chapter 14 and 15, how to share a common table with competing commitments and backgrounds, how to order time for a shared life. These are the ways that Paul's letter is oriented very practically. And we want to sort of be mindful of that as we're trying to discern what the rhetorical aim of Paul's writing is at each stage, as opposed to just thinking that Paul is writing an encyclopedia article or something like that. So hopefully that is coming through also. And what Elliot is saying, it's certainly going to be an emphasis of mine in trying to encourage an interpretation of this letter that is in touch or in tune with its rhetorical dynamics. Anyway, like I said, Try, great to have you in the course this time and to have this opportunity to study Romans together throughout the summer. You don't have to reply to this video, but if you want to, you may, of course, you're welcome to. And if you don't reply with anything, you know, that you write of any length, if you could at least just write received or something like that so that I know that you've gotten this video and that it's come through okay and you've been able to view it, that would be great. Looking forward to more conversation ahead. Thanks again for your good work here in week 1.